Super Mario Wonder is just around the corner, and whilst I hyperventilate with excitement, I've decided to go back and replay some of my other favourite Mario titles, and as always I would reach each world's boss fight and think,
You're trash. Boom boom. Excuse me?
man, bosses in platformers kinda suck, don't they? And not because they're difficult or anything, I'm very partial to a challenge. I love me some Dark Souls, and only last year finished the absolutely maddening task of 100% in Crash 4. No, platforming bosses suck because they're usually just so boring. So today I wanted to narrow down exactly why platformers have such a hard time making engaging boss fights and highlight the 3 main ways that developers try to fix this problem. But before we begin, it would mean the world if you could click on that cheeky little subscribe button down there, and whether you do or not, please enjoy the video. Modern video games are complex beasts that balance a wide range of mechanics, but we can usually break down a game to a fundamentally basic level using one question. What does it ask of the player?
What do you want?
Forza, for example, asks that you be able to make calls in judgment based on your conditions to most efficiently finish a task as quick as possible. It's a game about making decisions under pressure. Dark Souls asks that you be able to correctly read patterns in a situation, such as a specific layout of enemies or a maze-like area for the hazards, and then be able to navigate those patterns in order to survive each encounter. Platformers test your ability to react to obstacles quickly and efficiently whilst maintaining composure and being aware of your surroundings. So now let's take a look at what a boss fight is. A boss fight, or at least a good one, should be a test of everything the game has asked of you so far. Dark Souls bosses usually boil down to pattern recognition and figuring out how best to navigate them. They're hard, sure, but they rarely lack rhyme and reason. Attacks are well choreographed and very avoidable. It's just up to you to do what you've been doing with each area, which is figure out what the best route to success is, and then execute that route as perfectly as possible. The issue this poses for a lot of platformers though is that its key ask of the player doesn't exactly mesh well with the concept of a confrontation. Most platformers are at their core about running and jumping to avoid stuff that will swiftly unalive you if you're not careful. And when your entire arsenal of moves boils down to planting your feet on your enemies' heads, bosses can start to feel kinda samey. Now, as I mentioned, there are 3 main methods that I've seen platformers use to get around this problem. Method 1. Your Jumpman is pack it. Probably the most effective way to extend your platforming hero set of moves is to do what Sega did back in 2005 and give them a fucking gun. Now, it didn't work here, granted, but the majority of platformers that give the protagonist something to work with end up having much more engaging boss fights. Mega Man is probably the most notable example of this. Mega Man's bosses are so iconic that they're practically the main selling point of the series. So how does Mega Man make its bosses so memorable? The copy mechanic, of course. See, breaking the C drive on each Robot Master will give Mega Man the ability to insert their memory card into his gun, and use their weapons in future stages. This results in a Pokemon-like system where each boss is weak to one of its fellow boss's weapons. This makes beating each boss very rewarding, but also requires you think carefully about which weapons will be more helpful in any given scenario. And this could completely change the way you play the game. Find Woodman too difficult? Well, fire burns wood, right? So maybe you should go get Heatman's weapon first. But even Mega Man struggled to keep this up for more than a few games. It didn't take long before weaknesses started to become a little random and stopped making sense because they were simply running out of logical ideas, and this, in my opinion, made the bosses more frustrating than it did strategic. It's a complete coin flip as to whether you have the right weapon or not, and that sucks all the fun out of the system for me. Other examples of the heavily armed woodland creature archetype include the vast world of Metroidvanias. The whole appeal of these games is backtracking to new areas that you couldn't reach earlier once you find new abilities, and this translates very well into a boss fight setting. If your character is constantly getting maneuverability options and an entire weapons closet of guns to carry about, then of course there's more room for bosses to be more creative and engaging as well. Here's the thing, I've always struggled to actually class Metroidvanias as true platformers.
The fuck did you just say?
Did I have platforming in? Yes, absolutely, but so did Garten of Banban Chapter 2, and we're certainly not putting that up there on the list of best platformers of 2023, are we? But no, for real, you can't make sweeping statements about every Metroidvania, but in my experience at least, most of the actual platforming is incredibly basic jumping, with the actual challenge coming from clearing the enemies that obstruct those platforms, and navigating maze-like layouts. For this reason, I don't consider Method 1 to be an effective solution to making platform bosses more exciting. Metroidvanias can absolutely get away with this no issue, but for something like Crash or Mario, they're primarily trying to test your platform abilities. I don't think it's as effective. Method 2.
And now for something completely different.
This method refers to something that the Kirby series is very guilty of, and depending on how it's executed, this can be a good option. So what do you do if all your character can do is run and jump on things, but you need to create a climactic encounter with a villain that feels more grand than simply bonking their head? Why, you completely change the game, of course. Sonic Frontiers is an example of a game doing this well, in my opinion. Mostly anyway. See, each boss fight in Frontiers has you transform into Super Sonic as you fly around an arena, waiting for openings to do damage. And the key things to note here are, 1, openings are very frequent. They don't require you to sit through a repetitive barrage of attacks before getting a hit in. This gives the fights a sense of back and forth that keeps you engaged and feeling like you're always making progress. And second, these fights use the same basic combat and moveset systems present in the rest of the game, so they do still feel on theme. 3 bosses require you to use the same combo inputs you've been mastering throughout the open zones, but with a completely different scenario of flight-based combat. And another boss requires you to use your boost to chase down the enemy and do damage when you're close enough. They're fast-paced, they're frantic, and they're on theme for Sonic. That is until you reach the end. This thing fucking sucks because it's incredibly slow, you physically can't make it go any quicker, it's precise, and it's a top-down space shooter and the complete antithesis of Sonic gameplay. And that brings me back to the little pink puffball I mentioned earlier, Kirby. Kirby has this weird tradition of always including a space shooter stage or boss fight in all of the games. It's weird. They're not even really bad space shooters, it's just, I'm not here for this, you know, I'm trying to play a platformer. Crash 2 does this as well. Rather than reaction-based hallway platforming, you're met with a janky flying gimmick where you chase after Cortex as he shoots at you in space. Hang on, I'm noticing a pattern here. My heart always kind of sinks when I see a game completely change up its genre for a climactic moment. I just know I'm usually going to get some half-baked mini game that doesn't have many translatable skills from the rest of my playtime. And unless you're going to absolutely fucking nail atmosphere to carry an otherwise bland and puzzling section, like Sonic Frontiers does with its soundtrack. Then I actually think Method 2 is probably the worst thing a platformer can do to make a boss fight engaging. But what about Method 3? Will that finally offer the solution we so desperately need?
You're goddamn right.
Yes, I absolutely think this is the best solution to platformer bosses, and it involves making the boss itself an actual platforming challenge. This is something that a shockingly small amount of games do, but almost every time I play one, it's a banger. One of the earliest examples of this I can think of is the Labyrinth Zone boss in Sonic 1, and yeah, that one sucked because it was underwater, and if you take too long, Sonic goes. But hey, the Metal Sonic Racing CD was pretty cool. It's a boss fight that challenges you to complete a platforming section quickly whilst Metal attacks you, and that's a perfect confrontation for a game about platforming quickly. And to stick with the blue blur for a second, Sonic Advance 2 handled this really well as well. The bosses in this game are hard, but damn if they don't feel exhilarating, and extremely on theme because you are literally jumping over obstacles whilst moving incredibly fast and reacting under pressure. Trine is yet another. The final boss here is just a chase sequence, and it requires you use all 3 characters' abilities to a very skilled degree to reach the top and defeat the boss you're chasing, who actually uses your own abilities against you. It's a fantastic little flip-flop moment. But ironically, the best use of this method comes from the little dude that I originally felt was most guilty of boring boss fights, and that's Mr. Mario. See, between all the Kooglings and the Boom Booms, Mario has a couple of legitimately brilliant boss fights. The first being the finale of New Super Mario Bros. Wii. This is a fantastic use of this method. Here, as Bowser chases you through a fully destructible level, you have to actually bait him into carving out platforms for you to jump on. This is absolutely excellent design. It's tense, engaging, and it tests your ability to think on your feet and react to your surroundings. Odyssey does this pretty well too, having the game end with you taking control of Bowser using the game's focal mechanic, the captures. Again, this whole sequence is a test of platforming ability and highlights a core mechanic of the game you've been using all throughout, but in a much higher stakes and much grander setting. And finally, we have the final boss of Super Mario 3D World. This, in my opinion, is the best boss fight I have ever seen in a platformer. Not only is it a fairly challenging segment that tests your ability to platform under constantly rising pressure, it also has optional collectibles for added difficulty, and the boss acting as an obstacle to be constantly avoided throughout the chase, while constantly growing stronger by using all the various power-ups you've relied on throughout the game. And it tops this all off with incredibly intense music, fantastic atmospheric lighting and set pieces, and even a mid-boss fake-out before he jumps right back at you. This is how platformers should always handle bosses, in my opinion. They are consistently the highlight of every game I experienced them in, and I would love them to become more of a mainstay. But that is, of course, just my opinion. What are some of your favourite platforming bosses? Let us know down in the comments, and thank you so much for watching.